Okay. Welcome to Senate Education on Thursday, February 15th. We are starting with continuing our conversation on S220 from yesterday. This is an act relating to Vermont public libraries, and if everyone has their, hopefully say maybe their sheet from yesterday, we left off, we're going to move to section 7. So again, I think the two things that we need to, the one thing we need to return to now is section 6. We'll have a conversation about it at some point again, see where the whole committee is on patron records and age. So I apologize also, I lost my glasses, so I'm using Senator Westman's. Oh, I see, I think I see it. So please, could we pick up with then the library consultant position?
Yes,
This is 7.
this is section 7 and runs from pages 9 to 10. This section establishes 3 full-time library consultant positions, 1 within the Agency of Education, 2 within the Department of Libraries. And there's an appropriation at the end of the bill associated with these 3 positions.
Did they mention at the end of the bill how much? I
The
remember when we walked through it. Oh, yeah.
Yes, 225,000 to the Department of Libraries for the 2 positions, and half of that, 112,500 to the Agency of Education.
So for 3 full-time library consultant provisions. 1 with 8 and 2. Wow, that's a lot. I'll be surprised if that makes it over the finish line, Ms. Del Neo, just honestly, and I think this committee just needs to prioritize, is this where we would, if appropriation says, hey, you have $500,000 to spend on positions, is this where you would want to put them, or would you want to put them somewhere else, perhaps in the agencies? So, please, yeah, Senator Goode.
Are there any library consultants now?
Yes, we have youth services, access services, technology, government information and reference, continuing education, and operations. I feel like I'm skipping one because they're not watching. We have, I think, 6 or 7. Okay. Yes, and this is not a request from the department.
Sure,
It
it's
is our
from the
budget.
report, yeah. Ms. Del Neo, would you just, what is it, when you say consult, when this says consultant, they're talking about part-time kind of consultant, or is this a term that is used?
This is, this is a civil service position full-time. And they are, most of the consultants have a master's degree in library science. And they consult on those specific topics that I just mentioned. They serve as experts who help to train people in the certificate program. So they teach courses. They also consult library directors and they consult library trustees. So our department does a lot of work to support libraries throughout the state kind of being their best selves. And so that is how that term is used, and the pay that's associated with it is for that full-time degree professional with a master's in library science.
And recognizing that this isn't coming from the Department of Libraries, but from the study committee, would you mind weighing in on this as to the need?
The recommendation of the working group didn't actually specify additional positions for the department. The working group recommended that if there was additive work for the department, then it would be important not to add the additive work to the existing group. So just to clarify, the working group's position didn't call out 2 positions or these specific positions. As far as the department's need, the need for support for libraries is great. However, the department recognizes that there are many competing priorities at this time, and we did not include a specific request to grow our team in this budget. And I think that's really, as far as our priorities, we are focused on using the resources that we have to serve the community in the best way that we can. And we're not prioritizing these specific positions. I think some of what my testimony shared was really showing areas where we might be able to change our approach and lessen the impacts on the department. And that will come up later as you go through the bill today.
Yeah, please.
I think I can speak for the one that would be housed in the Agency of Education, which is coming from the school.
You know, that was, I'm sorry, I was thinking so much about the department.
Yeah, that's.
The working group did recommend, the working group, and this is not the department, I just want to make sure you see the chat I'm wearing at this time. The working group report did reflect what the school librarians shared with the community, which is that they would like to see a position restored to AOE that was removed maybe 20 years ago. And that is a like a school library consultant position. So thank you, Senator, for reminding me of that. Yeah, would be Senator. But that's, I do just have to put a point there. That's not an AOE or a Department of Libraries recommendation.
Right, that's coming from school librarians. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else on this section? I'll mark it that we need to have a conversation about consultant positions and the part of the creating one position within the agency. But anything else right now?
I like that we're talking about hiring somebody within the agency and not farming it out to a nonprofit or a consulting group or so, yeah. But I like that.
Good word, yeah.
I'm not sure where we're gonna find the money.
Right, right. And I think this committee, I'm sure corporations again would ask us, is this as big a priority as maybe getting somebody on the ground to make sure laws are being enforced and kids are reading and all that stuff. Hasn't been on the books for 20 years and we can hear from folks as to whether or not that was making a difference or not.
Okay,
Section 8.
for section 8, all right, this is on page 10. This one is fairly
Down
straightforward.
just a little bit, I don't know, just to put it, I'm gonna put it 32 instead of 35. People get cold, I mean,
I instantly felt the change.
She'll know it first.
All right,
that's right, you're from the south.
the start south on Massachusetts.
Yeah.
All right. So on page 10, this is relating to training and education for library staff. And really what this is doing is codifying an existing practice of the department. So this section proposes to amend the department's duties to formalize the practice of providing continuing education for a certificate in public librarianship. And again, this is already a certificate program that exists within the department. They have a curriculum for librarians to get this certificate. This is putting it in the duties of the department. Perfect.
Okay. Sounds okay.
All right, sections 9 and 10, public safety. So there are two provisions within Title 13 that are amended in these sections. Section 9 amends 13 VSA Section 1702 to add public libraries to the provisions governing criminal threatening at certain public facilities and locations. So for example, government buildings, polling places during elections, school buildings, and here public libraries are added in as well.
Questions? So this is, you're talking right now just 13 VSA 1702, right?
Yes,
So this is adding public libraries provisions governing criminal threatening. So right now it's schools, some government buildings.
public or private schools, post-secondary, places of worship, polling places during election activities, state house, or any federal, state, or municipal building. Now, municipal buildings already cover a big chunk of what the public libraries are. But there are free public libraries that are available to the public or places of public accommodation, but would qualify as a municipal building, which would be covered by this was. I'm bringing up, grouping them.
What do folks think?
Sounds good to me.
It's already covered in statute, right?
Well, not all of them. A lot of libraries are, I don't know the percentage. But
Those that are at your colleges, your post-secondary institutions, your school libraries are covered. Any that are municipal buildings, which would be any of your municipally established libraries, but the association libraries, incorporated libraries that are through public libraries would be brought in with this language.
I like my hometown library, Rebecca Cook's statement,
she was concerned.
she was concerned about it because we don't have a town police department. And that's gonna make her library staff the enforcers. And she doesn't wanna be in that business. But that is a municipal building.
So it's already, it's
That's
a
all
municipal
right.
building, then it already, she's already in that position.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is, I think, just pulling in some extra, some orphan libraries, if you will,
Right.
that aren't there. Okay. Senator Weeks, thoughts?
No, okay, seems reasonable.
Senator Sheen?
Nope.
Senator Hewitt? Okay, so we're okay with that. And then, so now for, VSA 4004.
Yes, so section 10 amends 13 VSA, section 4004, to add public libraries to the statute that governs the possession of dangerous or deadly weapons in a school bus, school building, or school property. This includes, if you go on, firearm possession. Public libraries and library grounds are added into the prohibitions here in section 4004.
So this is outside of the building, that's what we're talking about now, grounds, things like that.
It would be in the public library or on the public library's property.
Senator Sheen.
And so, just to be candid, this particular part was an idea that came from a constituent of mine a year ago, and one of the things that I learned in thinking about, and I'm looking at this is, it's my understanding there's different categories of public areas. And you have designated, you have a limited forum, so like courthouses, for example, which only certain people can come in and out, but they're, or, like military bases are public, only certain people can come in and out. Courthouses, also public, can't carry a firearm into either of those. But with a public library, where my understanding, there's no, you can't tell somebody that they can't come in. Is there a potential issue in saying for this public forum, you can't bring a firearm in? Do you see any issues there?
I will only say that it is something the committee should investigate, get some expert testimony on, especially with updates to Second Amendment jurisprudence.
Yeah.
This could be considered, I don't know if Eric Fitzpatrick has covered this in your committee yet, but a sensitive location.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a lot of discussion.
I don't know, I do not have the depth of knowledge to give you a deep answer.
Senator Weeks.
Does it have the intention of exception of law enforcement officers, et cetera, et cetera? I don't see that reference.
I will have to go back through the full text of the statute to see if there's already a carve out for law enforcement officers. I know that in many of the statutes, including, for example, the hospital buildings statute that passed recently, there's a carve out for law enforcement and security personnel. There is a carve out here in subdivision C3 for possession of firearms if the trustees of the library authorize possession or use for specific occasions or other specific purposes. It is slightly different.
Please, Senator Williams.
So school bus, if the school district owns the bus, that's considered school property. Again, we had testimony from Rebecca Cook that she didn't think that she wanted to get into that. And basically be making a sensitive area. And I don't support section 10. Now, didn't we have, Chris Bradley, the Federation?
Yeah.
Testify on this?
Yeah, he asked me, tall guy?
Yep.
Yep, he's following proceedings We're gonna,
Okay.
he texted that he'd like to come in if we move forward with that piece. And I'm gonna ask Morgan to have Eric Fitzpatrick in.
Okay.
Who's got all, next week to comment on that.
I mean, there's,
piece, to it.
they could do the same thing by putting a sign up there that says, no firearms, no deadly weapons. And then if they violate it, they're in violation of trespassing. So do we have to make, and, you know, do we have to make the libraries a soft target? Where people know that that's a place where nobody's gonna be carrying firearms or deadly weapons. And that's typically what happens.
I just think, to your point, even if a sign is put up, and, you know, we can learn more from Eric, but even if a sign is put up and the library is still considered a public place that's open to everybody, there could still be a issue when it comes to prohibiting carrying firearms. You know, the other analogy is, you know, carrying a firearm in a public park. You can do that. You know, there's no limits to who can go in and out of the public park. And so I'm wondering if or how that same concept would apply to a public library if there's no limits on who can come in and out. So those are my thoughts.
You've been through that in your other.
Yeah, so those are some of my initial thoughts on it.
Yeah.
I think Eric.
Yeah, Eric, correct. Okay, I flagged it, please.
All right. I did want to go back to Senator Reed's question. Yes, in subsection C of this section, there is an exemption for law enforcement officers engaged in their duties. It's not in the bill because it's not being changed, but in the, yes, in those ellipses, there's.
Still not applied to.
All right, sections 11 through 14. It's a series of amendments to the library governance sections in Title 22. And these sections amend provisions governing the mandatory and discretionary duties within the general law governing public libraries to align those duties and powers with the statute governing the powers and duties of library trustees. So sections 11 and 13 reflect each other so that there's consistency in those statutes with what the duties and authority of those officers are. Second, it amends provisions governing the maintenance of appropriations for public libraries by municipalities to provide that a municipality shall vote to appropriate funds for its public libraries in sufficient amounts for the maintenance, care, and increase of libraries. So you'll see that in section 13. It's the primary operative language. That second sentence is changed to say that at the annual municipal meeting, the municipality shall vote to appropriate money in sufficient amounts. It's not a significant departure from the underlying law, but it is a substantive shift in how that duty is phrased.
I'm not well schooled in legal language. What is the legal definition here of the corporation? In
Which section?
page 13, line 5.
Yes. So section 105 is going to apply to the trustee incorporated libraries. So it would be speaking specifically to the library, the public library itself.
So we ran into this when I was on our town select board, the library, because it's a municipal library, they wanted to give all their employees a raise, but it was gonna be a substantial increase to the budget. And because they have a board of trustees, we said, well, I'll keep a percentage of increase and we'll give it to the trustees and allow them to decide who gets what for a raise. And that was one way around it, but it was also some loophole in there with the board of trustees that could have caused problem for the municipality because the way we did it. Yeah, I can't remember, I'll have to find out more about it, but it had something to do with the fact that we had a board of trustees.
Certainly see a problem with insufficient amount.
Yeah.
It's just a landmark.
Where are you right now?
Page 14,
This.
line 18. Insufficient amount, I mean, there's never enough money for anybody, for anything, for any good purpose.
What do you think of that? Yeah,
Oh, yeah, that clause is added so that the municipality isn't just a contributor to the maintenance and care of the library, they are the base contributor. The appropriations from the municipality have to be in level amount to actually support the maintenance and care of the public library.
Yeah, but that's already the case, right? They are the sole,
Yes,
the
yes.
money, no,
Not
Not
necessarily.
everyone.
please.
So I wanna I have a question first and then I can answer, but.
And I'm sorry, I
wanna-
interrupted Ledge Council. Did you want to say something first? Sure, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanna just clarify, this section applies just to municipal public libraries? So the level of funding from municipalities to public libraries is varied, and even libraries that are municipal public libraries may not be receiving all of their funding from the municipality. And the working group heard repeatedly that the funding was insufficient, so then we looked at that the annual appropriations were very challenging to operate within, I think is a good way to put it. And in the working group's report, we broke down both municipal and incorporated public libraries, so those are the 30% that are nonprofits. But for both of them, the state of Vermont was considerably far from the average per capita spending for libraries of the same size. So looking at libraries that serve 5,000 people, libraries that serve 1,000 people. So funding for the libraries, both municipal and incorporated, is an area of continual concern and is often not sufficient to provide the service that statute says every Vermonter is entitled to.
Yeah, it seems to me that we'd be creating maybe I'm missing something, a real mess around with select boards and others, city councils, where there are, competing demands. And in statute, it says the libraries, there could be a major flood. But then people are gonna say, well, but I just worry about precedent. I've never seen us put anything that says sufficiently without some kind of definition. Senator Reed,
yeah, no, jump on that. Certainly I would consider state transportation budget insufficient. I would consider a school construction budget insufficient. I mean, it's a dangerous slope. And to have that language in here, I agree completely with the chairman that it just leaves us wide open to criticism. Because all the budgets seem insufficient in the current state of Vermont economics.
Well, that's the word, the word isn't insufficient though, right? It's insufficient
That's right.
amounts.
No, I understand
Yeah.
that. So in the contra perspective is that if it's not in a sufficient amount, then it's insufficient.
Right, gotcha.
So I just find the language dangerous.
Well, is there a precedent for the state government to be requiring municipalities to,
sufficiently.
yeah, I mean, is there any precedent?
You probably look into perpetual care funds and other trust funds that are held by trustees of public funds at the local level. So for example, there's a duty to appropriate enough money to maintain sufficiently the cemeteries that are under control of the cemetery commissioners at the local level. There's actually a bit of parity in play between libraries and cemeteries here, and that part of the funding for some of the municipal and nonprofit libraries that we're talking about do come from trust funds, but those funds don't necessarily grow because there's a statutory list of investments that the trustees have to use for purposes of the res of the trust, and they diminish over time. So that's where the sufficiency clause here comes in, is if you have diminishing res for the libraries over here, it probably has to be level funded by the municipalities. And that's why earlier when I was talking about municipal funding, to my knowledge and from what I remember from the report, I didn't memorize the 700 some odd pages, but that the primary funding sources for these libraries is the municipalities, even if they don't fully fund them.
Senator Sheen, Senator
Thank you. I think it's less so the criticism that I'm worried about, more so the challenge that could be created for select boards here. And I'm going to preface by saying I love libraries and I strongly support them, but I'm thinking about if a town, let's say a bridge washes out and the library also has a leaky roof. And, the town is trying to figure out, it's trying to move around money to figure out what they're going to pay for. And they are required by law to fix the leaky roof before they address the bridge or they address, I don't know, a broken light post on Main Street or something along those lines. So one of the things that I hear from people who are serving on select boards and school boards is unfunded mandates, and so that's one of the things that I am concerned about. Philosophically, I do want to see every library well funded and operational, but I think it feels like stepping into the realm of the select board and telling them what they shall spend money on. That's my initial take on
And
this.
Still, Mayo, did you want to, it sounds like the committee's in agreement on this. No, you're not.
Well, I haven't spoken yet, but I can speak after Catherine.
Thank you. I just want to note that these this bill as it's drafted, again, really is only looking at the municipal public library section. And so if the committee did change its minds in any way, I think there is an issue of, it sounds like you're leaning toward not including some of this language, but the matter of incorporated public libraries, which are 30% of the public libraries, which serve the same function, there is no requirement that I'm aware of for any funding from a municipality to the incorporated public library in their town that serves their community. So for example, here in Montpelier, they can put something on the ballot, but there's no requirement that any funding be given to the incorporated public libraries. And there's nothing in this bill that addresses that, but I think you should be aware of it because 30% is a large number of public libraries. And I think when people see a public library, they assume the municipality funded it and at a certain level, and there's not necessarily that relationship. And with regards to funding, I also want to clarify something that came up in this room the other day around state funding. There was discussion around another part of this bill, and it's funding from the state. There is not that type of funding. There's federal funding that the department gets at, but there's not actually state aid to public libraries. So I just want to be sure that that dynamic is understood, and I'd be happy to come back at another time. I need to run upstairs for
Yeah,
another
of course.
committee, but
We're
I'd be happy to
we're
come
gonna
back
keep
and
coming
talk
back
about
to
this.
this. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Senator Kilo.
Thank you. I don't mind being a lone dissenter here, by the way, but it seems like two things, like one, it seems like an out that a municipality has is that they get to define what sufficient is, right? So, well, sufficient could be a moving target, I think, and could be defined by the municipality, but also.
So can we just stand there for a second? It's just before, so to Senator Gulick's point. That's true across state government? I mean, is this tying people locking their hands in a way? Municipalities.
Is this locking them in?
Yeah, in some regards, you've heard the conversation. It's some here, myself included, feel like, okay, we might be boxing a municipality in. Senator Gulick saying, okay, but the local municipality can define what sufficient is. So can you just help us get out of the box or
I
stay in
think
the
you're
box?
gonna have to stay in the box of ambiguity because
Okay.
you're gonna be hard pressed to find a case that will define sufficiency for purposes of municipal funding. Having said that, this is sufficiency for a wide range of purposes, maintenance, care, and increase. Sufficiency for increasing the library is gonna be the most ambiguous. Sufficiency for maintaining the library is gonna be the least. What are the current needs and what would be a sufficient amount of an appropriation to make sure that the library, for example, can stay open? That is likely gonna be the basis for the legal test there.
You got a follow-up also, yeah.
Thank you, for seeing that. Yes. So that was my first point. My second point is simply now having served on the school construction aid task force, I'm really scared, worried to let buildings go decades without the support they need, because then you end up in a position that we're in the schools where we've got, hundreds and hundreds of millions per year of deferred maintenance, and that is, that's problematic. And I live in a city right now that has a lot of abandoned and derelict buildings because we didn't keep up with the maintenance, and I can tell you, it is a huge problem. It's huge, so I guess if there's any way we can avoid that. And because we can define sufficient, I just think, I don't know, I feel okay with this. That's just like I said, I'm happy being this lone dissenter, you all feel strongly the other way.
But sufficient could mean $1,000, if that's what they define.
And there are other legal terms you can explore to replace sufficient that might better meet the policy decisions of the committee. Necessary is a lower standard than sufficient.
I do agree with your point about buildings in this state. Elected city council members. I mean, honestly, it's like,
I wonder if institutions should weigh in on that. You think?
maybe.
I don't.
I think the League of Cities and Towns for sure.
So, I'd simply like to add on to Senator Buick's point that, I don't think anybody desires a state of decaying municipal or state facilities. It's just the economic reality of where we are. We can't afford everything. So that's kind of how we are where we are. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. And then to the other point about sufficient, is there's two perspectives. There's the government perspective on what's sufficient, and that's the municipality boards and, et cetera. Then there's the citizens' perspective. And what I think we're commenting on is that they're never completely in balance. And if you're the citizen, you're going to say, this is not a sufficient amount to keep the facility intact, to run the program, et cetera. So I think what we're trying to say is that you have to recognize that it puts the municipality into a bind when they're confronted by the citizen who objects to the insufficiency of the funding.
Along those lines, it sounds like, anybody can sue over anything, but it does sound like we're creating some tension there where somebody, the board of trustees could say, this funding is insufficient. We're going to sue the select board in the town based on this.
The proper remedy, if you disagree with the budget at the local level, is to take it out at the polling place in the following election. The likelihood of private right of action resulting from this is low, but the likelihood of aggrieved voters thinking that the budget was not sufficient for their purposes, if they vote for something else.
But I think it's my sense that we could accomplish have the same effect with this legislation by even striking the word sufficient. If you read it, it's in amounts for blah, 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 blah.
That is the underlying law, perfectly.
Then you just remove the fall.
The duty right now is that they must appropriate something. The new clause is the insufficient amounts.
We have to move on. I know you have to move on, but we've made a little progress. We're getting there. I actually am enjoying this bill. It's much more interesting.
Is it because of me?
No. Mr. Anderson, maybe tomorrow, another 30 minutes if it works at some point. If not, we'll see you on Tuesday.
All right.
Unless, we're talking about the possibility of coming here Sunday, we'll be able to turn it. Okay. Yeah.
let me know.
Okay.
Have Morgan add it to my calendar.
Thank you.
Sunday morning, 10 a.m.
Appreciate it. Mr. Fisher, looking bright with your Mardi Gras.
Are we live?
We are.
Actually, I should note, I was given this by your counterpart, Mr. Chair, in the House. It's my
Who's that?
understanding,
Oh,
by the
Representative
Chair of
Thomas.
Education,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
In the House, it's my understanding that one of his committee members may have got married yesterday.
Yeah.
So I am
Yeah,
on
that's great.
conscious of saying anything on the record when it's not my news, but I was given this and I'm wearing it proudly.
Nice.
Thank you. So I left the office before knowing I was coming here. So Morgan happily printed the agency's implementation plan. And how do you want to? So firstly, I haven't announced who I am. That's it.
Well, before you even do that, I just want to, Dr. Boucher was supposed to be with us today. She can't be with us, in the emergency, completely understand. We've asked Ted to come in and start to take us through, the CTE recommendations. And, got about 30 minutes to do that, so we're gonna have you jump in and give us some highlights. And I would welcome if Ms. St. James has any questions as you're talking
Absolutely.
to, feel free to raise them.
Absolutely. So firstly, for the record, Ted Fisher, Vermont Agency of Education. I'm the agency director of legislative affairs, and I'm very glad to be with you today. Apologies that I am again stepping in for Secretary Boucher. She sends her regrets, and she's looking forward to hopefully joining you guys next week when we have a draft. So I will be happy to answer questions from Beth and from the committee. I think Beth and I are also going to chat as a sidebar to go over some of the language things. There is companion language that I'm not putting in front of you because we have some things to iron out. So you should be seeing that next week.
Yeah. Senator Kulik, his question. Go ahead.
Sorry, Todd, I know you're getting started yet, and you're probably gonna explain, but is this whole packet commenting on this bill,
What bill do you have in front of you?
the
We have-
career and technical education
Is that
bill,
H-
207?
207. It is. I did ask Morgan to provide to you H 716 because, and if you remember, we did talk about this a couple weeks ago. Senator, with great appreciation to Senator Clarkson and the chair's sense of humor, the H 207 or S 207, excuse me, mentions that the agency shall bring this report, which we have brought. There is some language that we've already presented and requested from both from the Senate and from the House, and the House version has some of that language. And there's one caveat that I will signpost. So I also went over that.
That's the big change.
Beth St. James Office of Legislative Counsel, I believe you have two CTE bills.
We do.
You have two S-207, which is what Senator Clarkson introduced, and then you have a committee bill, S-304.
And they are the same, I believe.
No,
Not big
no.
change.
The committee bill actually contains not everything line by line, but almost everything that the House version that Ted is referencing right now contains, based solely on Ted's testimony from earlier in the session and AOE's written recommendation.
Beautiful. Thank you.
And I'm so sorry for missing that point.
Great, so it's got H 716, and we have it in our committee bill, it's as a report.
So I don't mind telling you all that last week I got in trouble with the Lieutenant Governor and the Secretary of the Senate because my pager goes off and it bypasses my silencing function. So I just put my phone on airplane mode so we don't get distracted anymore.
Here we go.
So,
So
okay.
what we're looking for is the committee bill.
The committee?
Yeah.
Which is S.
My fault.
304.
My fault. I
Oh,
should have provided.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to go over some of those recommendations. I did provide some testimony to you on those. Those include things like moving rulemaking for CTE from the state board to the agency in the hopes that once we go through some of our governance work next year, the agency will do rulemaking on this, which will be long overdue because it's been 2 decades. Some other work, and you'll actually note this as we kind of go through the the implementation plan. There are places where we've already addressed some of these items. So for example, we have a model policy requirement recommendation for you, which would be a model policy on career technical education that school districts would adopt. That would help sort of navigate the guidance and making sure students have access to career technical education. We also have some requirements for middle school, I'm gonna say like early high school exposure to students. We had previously talked about the committee, so I'm happy to refer to that and go back to it. And in S304, but I was planning to go over the fiscal recommendations today because that was sort of our goal from the APA report was to bring those this year and respectfully punt on some of the governance ones. We are actually working with APA, who are the consultants who created the report as contracted by GFO. And we're continuing to work with them in the hopes that the agency has now reached them to continue to work that governance things and bring those recommendations next year.
So, I think what might make the most sense for our thinking, my thinking, speak for everyone, but maybe let's go back to say, what is it that if the administration is hoping to pass this year on CTE? Tell us that broad picture. What exactly you're hoping. You have the bill is coming, but just in your own words,
Absolutely.
I run into a constituent. What is it that we're really hoping to do this year?
So for that, page 2, where it says summary of APA recommendation.
Page 2
Of the
of the report. Great, thank you.
And I also have the executive summary of the APA report as well here. So this is, you can find that there as well. So this is, it's, I don't actually know if they call themselves, I'm gonna mess it up. Augenblick Highlight
Oh, yes,
Associates.
right.
This has got your stamp on it, right?
Yes, so sorry, to answer that question, going slightly back, you'll see at the top of page 2, this plan is required pursuant to Act 127 of 2022, Section 17. That bill, that act required JFO to contract for a study. That study, JFO contracted with the APA. That study was delivered to the agency. The agency was required to do an implementation plan. We are delivering this implementation plan late. I think that hindsight is 2020. The timeline on that was probably insufficient, but I understand the urgency, which we also share. And so we are now bringing that. We also have an ongoing working relationship with the contractor to bring that forward.
And just to be clear, what you're gonna talk to us about right now is what you hope
Exactly,
we will pass
Exactly.
this year.
exactly.
Okay,
So, summary of APA recommendations. On them, so this is how they crosswalk it, and I'm just gonna briefly tell you what we're hoping to do for each of these items. And then we can dive into them, either through the report or through the bill more directly. So, funding, incentives or grants to improve the accessibility for students from schools that do not share a campus with a CTE center. I have my green book back there. There's already a grant under 16 via Title 16 that gives funding from schools to transport students to CTE centers. We're asking you to require us to study that and determine whether or not we should adjust the funding ratio. It is $1.50 in 1998 dollars, adjusted for inflation. I believe it's around $3 and change now. I asked Nicole Lee, our director of ed finance.
number one is a study.
And it's just
Come back
transportation.
next year, yes, and this is transportation aid to school districts and not to CTE. We're gonna be talking a lot about direct funding to CTE and changes how CTE is funded.
Yeah.
This is asking us to look into whether or not we need to change the transportation monies for schools and see if school transportation is kind of its own area, so that makes sense for us to look into that very specifically in terms and not change it as part of our changes to how we fund CT centers themselves.
And just so everyone knows, that's 304, the committee bill on CTs.
Okay, awesome. So all right, so cool. Number 1 is transportation to school districts
As a study.
as a study.
Okay.
Item 2 is create a facilities funding system for CTE centers. This is part of a lot of the meat and potatoes or the tofu and kale of this report. Which is moving from a model where we have a tuitioning system where CTE centers charge tuition based on costs to school districts, and then the state has several provisions of additional aid that we then direct directly. We're talking about over a period of several years, moving away from that, and we're going to directly allocate funding from the education fund to CTE centers based on a regional, an understanding on a statewide basis of the cost of the programs. Just to dive into it a little bit more.
No, hold on. Is this a study also?
No.
Or- So we would like
No, we want language.
appropriations to create a fund. No dollar amount, but create some fund that will eventually,
No fund. We're looking to do with a 2-year phase-in to create a new section of law that essentially extends the funding. And what AOE would do is calculate the cost per student per program. So for example, and I'm using an example where a CTE director who's listening might be like, oh my gosh, Ted has got it totally wrong. But for example, Burlington Technical Center has an aviation program. It's an expensive program to operate, right? We've got nursing programs that are expensive, and we've got certain trades programs that have lots of lumber costs and other things. So every program is different in terms of the cost per student operate. So what we're looking to do is over the period of several years, we'll be gathering data. We've already gathered significant data on program participation, as well as the funding costs. We're asking them to disaggregate that by program. And then we will use that to calculate on a statewide basis. So every school district in the state will have the opportunity to receive the same allocation based on real costs for each student participating in a program.
Senator,
Just a little confused on tactics here.
Mhm.
So I get the report, at least, as far as we've gotten into it. But I'm wondering, the language that you're talking about, is it embedded in one of the 2 bills that's already on the table?
No, it's to come. So we, as part of this report, also drafted some language. We're working with Beth on that. We were, that is going to be hopefully ready for next time. Just following this.
yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I apologize. I should have posted that more directly, which is this language came later because we requested from the proponents to go more time.
Senator Hewitt.
Thank you. Is this to do with the money follows the student argument, or is that number 3? I keep hearing that one of the problems with CTE funding is that the money follows the student. Is that what I'm talking about? No, never mind.
And I skipped over one here, so we'll have to come back to 2. I haven't used those words correctly myself, but I've definitely heard the argument. So what APA says is to design a funding system that treats all CTE equitably while incentivizing additional CTE capacity in high growth sectors, utilizing a weighted student funding formula, difference funding by CTE program. Okay. And so that incentivization thing is interesting. So
And just so you know, literally we have like 15 minutes for this. So I mean, we're looking for a
Understood.
big overview today. We're
Understood.
gonna come back to this.
And again, Jody might come back and be like, there are many reasons why this wouldn't work, but we have the Central Vermont Career Technical Center is a very short number of road miles up an admittedly large hill from the state airport in Berlin. There is no reason potentially that, aside from administrative barriers, why they couldn't also have an aviation program. So the goal is to try to put all CT centers in Vermont on equal footing to match need, to match student interest to programs, right? So, and essentially it would help them address some of the upfront costs of starting up one of the more expensive programs, because the money that the state will be directing to the program better matches the cost to educate one student in that particular program, if that makes sense. This is important incentivization. There's another incentivization question that I think we have some language about potentially studying for the out years, which is the idea of the state actually putting its thumb on the scale and saying this set of programs should get an additional additional set of dollars per student on an annual basis, because we want more students in that program and want to incentivize CTE centers opening up capacity. That's a decision that could be made. It's a policy decision. It's not one that we want to move to this model first, but that it could be something to consider in the future. So, create a facilities funding system for CTE centers, actually item recommendation number 2 from the APA report. And there is already conversations about facilities funding occurring in this building. So we have introduced intent language. You will find it in S304 that just says that it's the intent of the General Assembly that to include CTE centers. I will note, because we talked to each other, that the report of the task force or the working group on school facilities funding includes the recommendations. So that's all we're doing. That's all we want to do for that. We don't want to create a second duplicative effort. We have some policy elements, align calendars and academic requirements in CTE regions. So we have some recommendations about strengthening some of the powers and duties of regional advisory boards to start doing some of this work with a specific interest in working on bell times. So we have CTE regional calendars already, but we often don't have common bell times. And I learned a new word when I started doing this, digging into the CTE works, which is bell times. Not every school ends a period at the same time. So the idea would be at a certain common time across the region, all the students are done with second period and they all can go off to CTE. So that's one of our recommendations. There is a recommendation to review CTE teacher preparation, licensure requirements, and compensation to attract skilled professionals. We are not bringing a recommendation on that we are bringing a recommendation on that this year. There's a state capacity question for additional staffing at AOE to support career technical education. In the governor's recommended budget, there is 1 FTE for the AOE CTE team. And we would appreciate the committee's consideration and potential communicating with your colleagues at the other end of the building to support that when the budget comes.
What does that TE stand for?
Excuse me, full-time equivalent. I apologize. It's our nomenclature for one position. We say 1 FTE, but we mean 1 position. And that would be an education programs coordinator for career technical education. We have a state capacity required. This is another recommendation of theirs, require that career exploration be offered to middle school students. That language is already drafted in an S304. We have a state capacity to encourage greater secondary and post-secondary collaboration. We have that in S304 as well. I'm sorry, I don't have the section numbers from S304 in front of me, but we have a requirement that's starting off with a certain set of programs, including education, I think construction trades and 2 others. We require the AOE to work with the Vermont State Colleges system. And then larger systems changes, 9 and 10. Review distribution of programs and consider offering programs outside of CTE centers, and create either a coordinated regional governance structure or a single district for CTE. And those are the 2 that we're punting on for this year. We want to bring those back next year. We have intent language.
So 9 and 10, not this year,
Next year.
next year.
So we want to do the funding, get the funding and statute, start the transition. We do have some language that we've proposed in both the House and the Senate that says that all of this is contingent on the legislature doing governance work next year. So it would sunset or essentially not allow the programs to take effect. So you could consider that as a potential hook to make sure that a new legislature coming in next year and beginning of the next biennium is attentive to this. I'm going to pause for questions relating to navigation.
So, questions. So that's a good overview, Ted, of things that are in 304, as well as things that you're working with Beth on to include in 304. So it makes sense. What we'll do is we're going to have you back next week.
Yeah.
When Beth takes us through all of 304 and say,
Yes.
hey, this is our CTE bill. And then we can start to have some witnesses come in next week as well. Any questions for Mr. Fisher?
Good effort.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Terrific. Okay, committee, let's just take 5 minutes and then we're gonna come back. We're gonna shift to, what's it called? Yeah, Dolly, the Imagination Library.
That's
See her as a witness.
Thank you.
Or